There comes a moment, often in silence, when the soul begins to whisper a question that has no easy answer. It does not shout nor demand. It only asks, "Is this life really mine?" And in that whisper, something ancient stirs, a knowing, a grief, a longing. This is where the unraveling begins, not out of rebellion, but out of deep weariness, the kind that settles in after years of wearing masks so well you forget how your own face feels beneath them. Carl Jung once wrote that every excessive adaptation to the world distorts the self, that each time we repress a part of our truth to be accepted, a shadow is formed, a silent twin, gathering strength in the dark. It waits there, unacknowledged, uninvited, but not absent. Because the soul does not forget itself, even when we do. We were taught from the earliest years to please, to be good, to smile when hurting, to nod when confused. And slowly, the subtle art of betrayal began. Betrayal of instinct, of boundaries, of the sacred pulse of our authenticity. The persona we built, so admired, became a cage woven with golden threads. Respected, yes, but suffocating. James Hillman spoke of the imaginal calling of the soul, that quiet, poetic current pulling us toward what is deeply ours. Yet how often is that calling silenced, not by cruelty, but by fear? Fear of exile, fear of not being enough, fear of disappointing the roles we were assigned before we even had the words to say no. So we say yes, to careers that numb, to relationships that hollow, to expectations that bend us until we no longer recognize the shape of our longing. It doesn't happen all at once. The loss of self comes quietly, in small hesitations, in the way you bite your tongue during truth, in the way your shoulders tense when you're about to speak. But don't. In the invisible contracts you sign with the world, I'll be what you want if you just let me belong. But belonging at the cost of self is not belonging. It is abandonment. And the soul knows. It always knows. That is why so many wake up in midlife not in crisis, but in grief, not for what happened, but for what never did, for the life unlived, for the truths unfelt, for the voice within that whispered year after year, "This is not it," and was ignored. So the real question is not "Who am I?" a question too burdened with shoulds and comparisons. The real question is, who would I be if no one expected anything from me? What would remain if all masks fell? What would rise if all roles dissolved? This is not a call to isolation. It is a call to remembering, to gently peeling back the layers that were once survival but are now suffocation. This is the beginning of a return, not to who you were told to be, but to who you have always been, waiting beneath the silence. And it starts with a choice, not dramatic, not loud, but sacred, the choice to stop living for others and begin living from the truth. There is a kind of wound we carry that has no visible scar, a wound that begins not with violence, but with silence. In childhood, this silence is learned early. The moment we sense that certain parts of us, our anger, our curiosity, our wildness, our truth, bring discomfort to those we love, we begin to hide. Not out of deceit, but out of love. A child will sacrifice anything to remain close to the source of affection, even their own authenticity, and so begins the fragmentation of the soul. We learn to smile when we want to scream, to agree when we ache to protest, to shape ourselves around the emotional weather of others. This adaptation is praised. We are called good, easy, well-behaved, but deep beneath the applause, the self starts to fracture. What is not expressed does not disappear. It retreats, waits, and begins to fester in shadow. Jung called this the complex of acceptance, a psychic knot formed when the gaze of the other becomes more powerful than the voice within. We begin to measure our worth by reactions, not resonance, by being liked, not by being whole. The result is a self built on performance, constantly scanning for approval, terrified of the quiet moments when applause ceases and the inner voice dares to speak. And yet, the pain of this arrangement doesn't come all at once. It reveals itself in subtle forms, in anxiety that spikes when you speak your truth, in the way your chest tightens when someone disapproves, in the exhaustion after a day of pretending to be what you're not. These are not weaknesses. They are the soul's alarm bells, reminding you of how long you've been living outside yourself. At the root of it all lies a fear older than language, the fear of symbolic death. To be cast out of the tribe, to be unloved, to be seen and rejected. This fear is ancestral. It runs through our blood. And so we do what is necessary to survive. We adapt, we minimize, we betray, quietly, repeatedly. But in this survival, something sacred is lost. The inner saboteur, disguised as humility or politeness, is often just the echo of a child who once feared abandonment, and unless seen with compassion, it continues to run the show long after the danger has passed. The path back is not found in blame, it is found in tenderness, in tracing back the steps where you left yourself behind, in seeing not only the fear, but the courage it took to survive with a fractured soul, and from that place, something begins to heal, not because you force it, but because you finally listen, not to the noise of expectation, but to the truth you buried, waiting patiently to be remembered. Guilt is a strange companion. It arrives not always when we've done something wrong, but often when we've done something true. For many, the first steps toward authenticity are met not with freedom, but with a wave of shame. Why? Because the psyche, long conditioned to survive through adaptation, interprets self-loyalty as betrayal. We are taught that guilt is a moral compass, that it arises to correct wrongdoing, but in the realm of the soul, guilt can be something else entirely. It can be a residue of old conditioning, a ghost from a time when self-abandonment meant safety and self-expression meant risk. In this light, guilt becomes not a sign of error, but a sign of emergence. Jung spoke of the superego, the internalized voice of the collective, the culture, the tribe. When you begin to live differently, when you say no where you once said yes, when you choose solitude over performance, the superego resists. It tugs, it accuses, it warns. And this pull creates an invisible weight, a psychic gravity that attempts to return you to the orbit of conformity. This is not just psychological, it is archetypal. The collective has always feared the one who steps outside the circle, because their freedom is a mirror, and mirrors, when held too close, reveal what others are not ready to see. That's why guilt often follows moments of clarity. You say what you mean and feel guilt. You rest instead of overworking and feel guilt. You walk away from what suffocates and feel guilt. But what if that guilt is not a signal to return, but an initiation into your own truth? What if it is the echo of a shadow once exiled, now trying to return home? We've been told that being good means being selfless, agreeable, compliant. But often that goodness is a mask for suppression, a spiritual costume worn to protect others from the discomfort of your fullness. And in shedding that costume, the guilt that arises is not proof of wrongdoing. It's the birth cry of a soul reclaiming its shape. So when guilt visits you on the path of liberation, pause, breathe, and instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" ask, "Who am I betraying by being true, my past or my essence?" The answer will not always be easy, but it will be honest. And in that honesty, there is healing, not the kind that pleases everyone, but the kind that gathers your scattered parts and whispers, "You are allowed to return to yourself, even if it hurts, even if it shakes what others expect, because the cost of authenticity is guilt, but the reward is freedom." and the soul, above all else, longs to be free. Some wounds wear halos. They disguise themselves as virtues, kindness, generosity, selflessness. But beneath their light, there's often a deep and unspoken ache, the need to be needed, the longing to heal others as a way of avoiding one's own fractures. This is the wound of the Savior, the one who rescues not out of wholeness, but out of unresolved sorrow. It begins subtly, a desire to help, to soothe, to carry, and at first it feels noble. But over time, something inside begins to tire, not from giving, but from the silence beneath the giving, the part of you that is never held, never tended to, never seen. The Savior archetype, so praised and admired, can become a mask worn to avoid the depth of your own pain. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche where our disowned truths reside. Jordan Peterson once said, "If you are not a monster, you will never be good, because you will be weak." And though these words may seem harsh, they point to something real. True goodness does not come from denial. It comes from integration, from knowing your capacity for darkness and choosing, with consciousness, to channel it with integrity. Many who live to please others carry a disempowered shadow. They suppress their anger, their desires, their boundaries. They mistake silence for peace, compliance for love, and in doing so they abandon their own fire, the very energy that could have forged a fuller life. The spiritual ego can be deceptive. It tells you that to be evolved is to be endlessly patient, endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving. But true spirituality is not about erasing your edges. It's about embodying all of you, even the parts that tremble, even the parts that rage, especially the parts that say, "This is not enough for me." To stop living for others is not to become cruel. It is to become whole, to welcome back the parts of you that were sent away in the name of being good, your power, your truth, your hunger. Your fire. These are not flaws to be corrected. They are forces to be integrated. And when you stop saving others as a way to avoid yourself, something beautiful happens. You begin to meet people not from need, but from presence. Not from obligation, but from truth. You stop controlling through care and start loving through authenticity. Because healing is not about being the light for everyone else. Sometimes it's about walking into your own shadow alone and finally realizing you are not broken, you are just unfinished, and the pieces you left behind in the name of pleasing others, they are waiting. Not for rescue, but for return. There are lives we live, and lives we leave behind, not through dramatic choices, but through small, repeated silences. We sacrifice pieces of ourselves, not to survive disaster, but to survive approval. And slowly, the life we were meant to live becomes a ghost, wandering beneath the surface of the one we perform. This is the exile of the self. Jung saw it clearly, that the unlived life does not disappear, it waits. It speaks in dreams, in dissatisfaction, in the quiet sorrow that visits without warning. It lives in the fatigue that cannot be explained, the restlessness that no achievement soothes, the tears that rise without a story. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of forgetting, signs that something essential has been left behind in the name of being accepted. To be accepted, we learn to dim, to edit, to wear the right face in the right room. We master the art of adapting, and in doing so, forget the art of becoming. And yet, the soul does not forget. It stores the unlived life in images, in longings, in night dreams that carry the scent of something more. Jung believed dreams were not random. They were the voice of the self, offering maps back to the parts we abandoned. A symbol, a place, a figure. These are invitations, clues, reminders that the unlived life is not lost, only waiting. The archetype of the deserter haunts many, not the one who betrays others, but the one who betrays themselves. the one who leaves their true path to walk the road that pleases the world. There is a quiet violence in this kind of abandonment, because the soul does not argue. It retreats, it whispers, and when unheard, it begins to ache. In the body, in the heart, in the quiet moments of reflection when everything looks right from the outside, but feels hollow within. Ask yourself, gently, how much of your life has been lived to be chosen rather than to be real? How many parts of you had to die just to be loved? These are not accusations, they are invitations, not to shame, but to awaken. Because no matter how long you have wandered, the road back to yourself remains. And on that road, there is no need to burn everything down. You do not need to leave the world. You only need to stop leaving yourself, one moment at a time, one truth at a time, until the life you live begins to echo the one that has been waiting within you all along. Not perfect, but honest, not always understood, but finally, fully yours. To choose yourself, truly, deeply, unapologetically, often feels like betrayal. Not because you have done harm, but because you have broken a pact. A silent agreement to stay small, to stay pleasing, to stay who they needed you to be. And yet, every true initiation begins with this kind of rupture, a tearing away from the familiar, a betrayal that is not cruel, but sacred. We grow up believing loyalty is the highest virtue. Loyalty to family, to roles, to expectations. But the psyche, like the earth, has seasons. There comes a time when fidelity to others becomes infidelity to the soul, and the heart begins to ache, not from rebellion, but from obedience, from the quiet agony of being faithful to everything, except what is real inside. Jung spoke of this moment as a turning point in individuation, the birth of the self through the death of illusion. It is a painful crossing, because when you begin to say yes to yourself, you often say no to everything that once held you. The patterns, the personas, the relationships that were built not on truth, but on agreement. You stop playing roles, and that alone can feel violent. To the outer world, this looks like disobedience, but to the inner world, it is reunion. You are not betraying others, you are remembering yourself, and that remembering often demands solitude. Like Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, those who reclaim their inner flame are often punished before they are praised, misunderstood before they are seen. There is grief here, grief for the version of you that kept the peace at all costs. Grief for the years spent proving, pleasing, performing, but there is also power, because when you walk through the fear of being alone, you discover the sanctuary within. And in that sanctuary the soul speaks. It says, "This is who I am. Not who I was told to be, not who I pretended to be, but who I have always been, beneath the noise, beneath the masks, beneath the centuries of silence." To choose yourself is to break the contract of invisibility. It is to say, with trembling hands and a steady heart, I will no longer trade my truth for belonging. I will no longer sacrifice my essence for acceptance. This is the sacred betrayal, not of others, but of the false self, the self that was never real, only necessary. And in betraying that illusion, you begin the slow return to the center, not to be separate from the world, but to meet it, finally, from within your own skin, whole, awake, unhidden, real. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when something shifts within, not with fireworks, not with applause, but with a deep exhale. A moment when the inner war ceases, when the countless voices of expectation grow still, and you realize you are no longer trying to be someone, you are simply being. Marie-Louise von Franz called this the inner wedding, the sacred union between the parts of you that once lived in opposition, the part you showed and the part you hid, the persona crafted to be loved, and the essence that waited patiently to be seen. This wedding is not dramatic. It does not need ceremony. It happens in the stillness of the soul when you choose, again and again, to be true. Leaving behind a life built for others does not mean exile. It means return. A return to the home within. A return to the voice you silenced. A return to the body that held your pain. A return to the breath you withheld in rooms that did not welcome you. This is not a lonely path. Though it begins in solitude, it ends in communion with your own being, with the world, with the sacred rhythm of existence. Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate what seems meaningful." And perhaps that is what shifts most when you stop living for others. You begin to speak from a deeper place, not louder, but clearer, not to convince, but to share, not to be accepted, but to be whole. The real transformation is not about becoming someone new. It is about unbecoming everything that was never you. The masks, the performances, the roles adopted in fear. And as each one falls away, you do not disappear. You become visible, finally, in your own light. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of another, one where you are not driven by guilt or shame or the need to prove, but moved by presence, rooted in your center, guided by the quiet knowing that you no longer need to earn your place in the world. You already belong because you belong to yourself. And from this place, the world does not become easier, but it becomes truer. You meet others not in performance, but in presence. You love not from fear, but from fullness. And you walk not in search of approval, but in the grace of your own becoming. The masks have served their purpose. The roles have run their course. Now the soul takes the lead, gently, firmly, authentically. And as you walk forward, not away but within, you will see it was never about changing who you are. It was always about remembering that your truth was never too much, your presence was never a problem, your voice was never too loud. It was simply waiting for your permission to be heard.